Right now, it feels like Cardano is in the middle of the greatest Trojan horse operation in the history of crypto, and it's actually working. That dark Trojan horse is named Midnight. If you're just biding your time until we all jump out of the horse and plunder the enemy stronghold, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Let's see, who do we have here? Eric Williams, Neo Chad, Emilio's here. Yes, we definitely built a horse. Fly Over Me says all my little Ada lobsters are inside that dark Trojan horse. Might be true. This might be true. Thank you for saying that, Emilio. Appreciate that. Daniil says, I said it down below, but I think if things go our way, we might all need this sponsorship Daniil is describing here. Emilio mentioned soldier lobsters, definitely. Blue Mammal says, let's run it. Night crawlers, I like it. Emilio says, it looks like it. Charles said something about partners in the hundreds yesterday. That sounds good. Let's go, Jordan. Let's go. At Cardano, let's go. Jordan for America says, not going to make the live, but we'll listen on the Community AM. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Listen anytime you want. Anytime you want. At Cardano says, looks like the offspring of a giant horse and an at. Yes, it does. I had the same impression when I first created that. Streetwise, what's up? Thank you for joining. Hola, Rulo. Thank you for joining. Pucky Hawk's here. Hey, Pucky Hawk. B117's here. Yo, what's up? What's up? Patrick Stewart is here. Good to see you. Good to see you, Patrick. Be Grateful for All says, good evening. Good evening. Jose Cano's here. Hello. Bindo Camp's here. Andiamo. That's right. Let's go. Let's go. Okay. So I think we should analyze what's going on here, right? We've known for a long time that Midnight was coming. And we've known for a long time that part of the rationale, part of the reason for being of Midnight is to create greater interoperability. I think what's really going on here, if you took Charles and a bunch of other smart people at IO, of which I believe there are many, if you took those people, sat them around a big round table, and you laid a task before them and you said, hey, let's try to create a Trojan horse to get everybody in crypto to accept Cardano and get rid of all this tribalism. Let's come up with a really, I'm going to describe it pejoratively, but I don't really mean it pejoratively. Let's come up with a really manipulative way to get all of the ETH maxis, all of the Bitcoin maxis, all the Solana guys, especially all those guys who hate us for no reason. Let's get all those guys into Cardano. Like, how would we do that? It seems like Mission Impossible. How do we pull off Mission Impossible Tom Cruise over there in the corner? Ethan Hunt, was that his name? Ethan Hunt. Ethan Hunt, how do we pull this off? So Ethan Hunt and Charles and the entire IO Mission Impossible crew, they sit down and think about this for an hour. And I think they would come up with something like, okay, well, there's so much tribalism and there's so much hate towards Cardano. We probably can't even call it Cardano. Whatever this vehicle is that we're going to use to infiltrate Ethereum and Bitcoin and Solana and all these other ecosystems, we probably can't even call it Cardano, because then they'll just immediately reject it. You know what I mean? They have this Cardano derangement syndrome. We'll talk about derangement syndrome a little later. They have this syndrome. They just hate it. They hear the words. They're repelled by it. We have to call it something brand new. So like, okay, we'll come up with a totally different name. And we'll probably even have to say it's like kind of like a brand new blockchain. We'll say it's a brand new blockchain. It'll have a brand new name. And it has to contain something irresistible to them. It has to be irresistible. Like, what do they need? what do all these people need who are in crypto? What do they need more than anything right now? And you could reasonably come up with the conclusion that what they need is privacy. They need privacy. So let's create a privacy chain. But we've had privacy chains before. Regulators love to go after them. It's like the founders of these privacy chains are always receiving letters, from regulators and legal authorities. We got to do something slightly different than that. So let's give it some duality, shielded and unshielded transactions, so that it's not the chain obscuring everything. The users can have this choice: shield the data, keep the data unshielded, and then we can say it can be compliant. It can comply with the regulations. And we've also going to make it irresistible in another way. We're going to give a huge portion of the chain to the ADA holders. We're just going to give it to the Cardano people. We're just going to give them this giant chunk of this entire new chain. And we're also going to give a tiny bit to Bitcoin, the Bitcoin holders. We're going to give a tiny bit to the ETH holders, a tiny bit to the Solana people, a tiny bit to all these other ecosystems. We're going to give all these people a little bit of the chain to make it even more irresistible to them. And really what we're building here is just Cardano privacy chain, as is obvious by the fact that the Cardano holders, the ADA holders, own a giant chunk of the tokens. And the tokens ride on the Cardano rails. The token actually lives on Cardano. Huge chunk of the tokens are owned by the Cardano holders. In fact, let's give them, I ran the numbers, personally. I think I was allocated, like, with the allocation and the meager amount of mining I've done so far, I think I got like something like 65%. I think the share of all the Cardano tokens I have versus the share of all of the Night tokens I was either allocated or was able to mine, vast majority of that being the allocation in the first part of the glacier drop. I think my share of all the Night tokens is like 65.5% as much as my share of all of the Cardano tokens, both of which are tiny, mind you, very, very tiny share of all of the tokens, but 65% is pretty good, right? It's like Bitcoin and Ethereum, all these other chains, they didn't get nearly the kind of allocation we got. We got a humongous allocation. You could call this the Cardano privacy layer. The name of this could have very well been Cardano privacy layer, but when we're sitting around planning Mission Impossible here in this hypothetical world, that's not the most optimal name to give it. The most optimal name to get it to avoid that Cardano derangement syndrome, something else. So they come up with Midnight. But once that Trojan horse is at the gate and the adversaries open up the gate because they're like, oh, we want this, we need this privacy, and we want those tokens. As soon as they open up the gate, we're basically going to pop out of a trap door in the bottom of the horse. We're going to pop out of that trap door and flood through the gates. We're going to flood through those gates. So I think, probably there's still a lot of drama to come with people saying, IO is spending all of its time on Midnight. Charles is spending all of his time on Midnight. But if you think about it, they could have easily called Midnight the Cardano privacy layer. I mean, really, the only ones who got cut out of Midnight are the CF and Emergo, right? They kind of don't play the same role. They're not founding entities of Midnight like they are of Cardano. They kind of got cut out of those roles for Midnight. But as normal members of the Cardano ecosystem, I don't think we care. As normal citizens of Cardano, I don't think we care. And we've got a slightly different name. It's not called Cardano privacy layer. It's called Midnight. But I think this really is our dark Trojan horse to just get through the gates, to have a different relationship with the rest of crypto, and to have all these things we haven't had before, all of the privacy, all of the interoperability. In fact, this seems to be so true that today, which was day one of the 2-day Midnight Summit, we saw this. So not that. Actually, we'll cover that in just a second. We saw something kind of interesting. So there are people who have, who have spent a lot of focus on saying bad things about Cardano. We all know this to be the case. There are proponents of other blockchain ecosystems who, over the years, their main sort of engagement farming strategy has been say bad things about Cardano. Why do they do this? They do this because they know we'll respond, because we're really engaged as a community, all the way up from sort of the rank and file members of the community like me and you, all the way up to the very top. We're pretty engaged, so we actually respond. So when somebody makes a post like this, they get a response like this from Charles. So this poster said this about Cardano, pretty simple, sophomoric kind of generic insult about Cardano, the kind of stuff I don't even pay attention to anymore. In fact, I didn't even know who this account was. I didn't even know who this person was. Doesn't surprise me that Charles responded to it, though. Charles is a passionate guy, as we've discussed many, many times on this channel. He is the kind of guy who responds to this sort of stuff. So if you go back and look at this account has done a lot of engagement farming versus Cardano, just like this, quite a bit. And you notice this is pretty recent, October 4th. But when we look at what happened today at the Midnight Summit, you also see this. This is a panel discussion. Can zero-knowledge cryptography and privacy-enhancing technologies finally realize the promise of Bitcoin? And that same poster, that same person is one of the 4 panelists at the Midnight Summit 2025 that just took place today. This was October 4th, 2025. This is just today. Panelist at the discussion. So even though we all kind of know this style of engagement farming, this is not, we're very familiar with this. This is all kind of just some fake stuff. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time talking about Cardano, and you can tell it's, envy. They see how strong the Cardano community is. They know it's a great engagement strategy because we will engage. We will engage. It's a great engagement farming strategy because the Cardano community will clap back, right? All the way up to the top, all the way up to Charles. But you see, even with all of this, and there's a long history of this with that particular account, even with all of that, just, what is it? Was it 12 days later, 13 days later, that same person on a panel at the Midnight Summit 2025. This is all kind of some fake news, right? All this back here is kind of some fake news. And if this was called the Cardano privacy layer, would this be happening? Maybe, but maybe not. If it's called Midnight, this kind of thing can happen. So I think the Trojan horse strategy is probably highly effective. I can't imagine if this was called the Cardano Privacy Layer Summit 2025, we would see this phenomenon. October 4th, today. I don't think this kind of thing would be going on. I think the Trojan horse is highly effective. And it's not all just the change in name. I mean, obviously people realize who created Midnight. It's more than that. It's the rest of Midnight as well, which we learned a lot about at this summit. So we're going to talk about that next. Let's see who else has jumped in here. Easy Weez is in here. ADA sentiment feels all-time low, falling apart with blame games among the community. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll hit that. Get the entire continent of Antarctica to adopt. There you go. There you go. The entire population of Antarctica. What is it? Probably less than the number of people who will watch this video ultimately. What's up, James? Thank you for joining. Bindo Camps has still kind of got a backing of Charles Scammer, Charles Scam. Morning, Mission Zambia. Good morning. Daniil says, don't summon it. Otis Fricio, what's up? What's up? Thank you for joining. They all care about the money. They will join when the time comes. That is so true. And that is true nowhere as much as it is in crypto. It's like the tribalism is all fake news when there's money to be made. Rulo says muted all those silly accounts, by the way. Yeah, I didn't even know who that account was. People were like sending me messages about that poster being a panelist at this event, and I didn't even know who it was because I don't pay any attention to any of those guys. Like, it's just after seeing that, basically since the very start of crypto, that kind of engagement farming has been going on so long. It's just like it doesn't really hold any interest for me. What does hold interest for me though is what they're all really here for, and that's this. So Charles did a keynote today, and it was kind of a great keynote because he started with a slide that he said he kind of didn't write, and it was the kind of slide you'd expect in this kind of presentation. And then he said, actually they were going to skip to the slide he wrote, and the slide he wrote just said when midnight, and he answered all of our questions about timing, some of which we've discussed on this channel in the past. So we've got different eras of midnight, just like we've had and are still having different eras of Cardano. We had Shelley, Byron, Voltaire, Basho, and different things happen in these different eras. The same will be true for midnight. So if you are not from, this part of the world, you may not recognize these words and where they probably come from. Knowing that Charles was born in Hawaii, you immediately guess, if you're familiar with words that look like these, you immediately guess this is Hawaiian. So we go to Grok and ask Grok what these words mean. Grok says these are phases of the moon cycle. In the Hawaiian lunar calendar, the moon cycle is divided into 30 named phases. So there are 30 names for each of the nights in the lunar cycle. And these are 4 different nights in the cycle. Hilo is the first night where the moon appears as a faint thread or thin waxing crescent. So this is the waxing crescent moon, the first visible sliver after the new moon. Kukolu is the 5th night. This is during the waxing crescent phase. Mohalu is the 12th night during the waxing gibbous phase. And Ua, I think Charles pronounces Ua. I have no idea if that was a correct pronunciation, if he sought out, some kind of coaching on how to pronounce this from a native Hawaiian speaker or not, but he pronounced it like Ua. This is the 13th night, appearing round during the waxing gibbous phase, closer to full, often associated with fruitfulness. So this is basically like the first night when the moon appears to be a full moon. So this all makes sense. If you look at these phases, we've got a waxing crescent moon, waxing gibbous moon. We've got, this would be like just after the new moon, waxing crescent moon, waxing gibbous, and then the full moon, basically. So good names for these eras. So just like in Cardano, different things are going to happen during these different eras. The date of this Hilo era is actually going to start on the 8th of December. So this will be the launch of the Night token and the launch of dust accumulation. This, according to Charles's presentation, will be the listing of the token and liquidity in the exchanges. So all the things for the token to start trading. This, of course, is exciting to everybody who's involved in the glacier drop. This is an important date, and we've been wondering about the exact date. So Q1 of 2026 will be this Kukolu phase. This is the waxing crescent phase. So during this phase, during Kukolu, dApps will go live and will be on a federated mainnet. So the members who are operating the federated mainnet are going to include IO, and it sounds like probably Google, and Charles said some other large companies. But based on some of the other interviews he's given and things like that, it sounds like definitely Google is going to be one of the companies involved in this federated mainnet. So if you remember the early days of Cardano, this sounds quite a bit like the early days of Cardano. Pucky Hawk says, according to Grok, the population of Antarctica is about 5,000 people because it's the summer there. Okay, we'll go with the winter population. Winter population, hopefully, is less than the number of people who see this video. That would be slightly larger for sure. Morning, Mallow. Thanks for joining. Fly Over Me says, don't forget day 21. What's the name of day 21? I actually don't know. What's the name of day 21? So if you remember the early days of Cardano, though, we had a federated mainnet, and then we had the ITN when the stake pools got to jump in and sort of practice validating blocks during the incentivized testnet. The same thing is going to happen in Cardano during Mohalu. During Mohalu, the SPOs and the nodes will go online in the ITN. SPOs will start making blocks. The dust capacity exchange will become a thing. And we'll have sort of this parallel coexistence of the federated and decentralized systems. So it'll be an ITN, and then eventually there'll be a fork, and the SPOs will be running the main net on a fully decentralized basis, and that will be UA, this last era that will happen in Q3 2026. You notice this is like highly compressed versus what happened in Cardano. In Cardano, these types of things happen over the course of years. Here we're talking about 9 months. This is like 9-ish months if we're going from December of this year to Q3 of next year. So during this last phase, though, we end up with a fully decentralized mainnet, recursive, trustless bridge infrastructure to Cardano, and interoperability with the other blockchain ecosystems. So there you have it. Over the course of this next year, we're going to have a highly compressed timeline going from Hilo to Kukolu to Mohalu to Ua. So apologies if anyone is a native speaker of Hawaiian. I apologize for butchering those words, but I have absolutely no linguistic expertise in that language. Okay, Pucky Hawk says winter in Antarctica is April till September, and the population drops to. Okay, now we're talking. Now we've got them beat. We've got Antarctica beat as far as viewers of this video. Hopefully, if it goes well. One base stays open. Okay, good. I didn't want them out populating us. So this is pretty exciting news. I like that this is a compressed timeline. I was a little bit afraid it was going to look more like Cardano. Like the Cardano ITN was fun. If you were around during those days, it was super fun to, see the birth of the stake pools. If you participated in the ITN, I did. It was a very interesting time. Mike M says privacy coins are trending meow. They are. It's true. They're trending right now. So I mean, this was like, I kind of feel bad. I feel a little bad for Charles and Midnight because this is a bit of the best laid plans phenomenon, right? It's a couple years ago or even a year ago, if anybody had asked almost anybody in crypto, what is most likely to be the best time to launch this brand new chain, this brand new partner chain of Cardano or any chain of any type, the answer invariably would have been December of, year 4 of the cycle, which is next month when this is actually going to launch. And of course, we're in a very different environment than you would have expected. Brian Packard says, I missed the 14% ITN rewards. I also missed the ITN rewards. The ITN rewards were much better than they have been post ITN by design. So I do feel bad. I do feel bad. Yep, I agree. Mike. Privacy coins are trending. I did a whole video where we talked about it. I didn't talk about the entire video, but a good portion of the video we talked about what Zcash is doing. Incredible growth for a fellow Dino coin there. So I feel bad for Midnight because these are very uncertain times, of course, in crypto. But I like that they're sticking to the plan here, and we're gonna go ahead and do the launch. And the crypto markets are gonna do what they do. If you've been around crypto for a couple cycles, you've been in this rodeo before. We go up, we go down. The markets have a mind of their own. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. The projects pretty much just need to keep building, launch their products, ship code, and everything will keep going. So Charles says the Midnight Foundation is going to be very KPI driven. This is a point he's driven home, no pun intended. He's driven home many, many times. He keeps mentioning that this foundation, the one involved in Midnight, is going to be accountable for these KPIs. So I'm hoping that means we get a lot of the adoption and a lot of the things that we wanted in the past for Cardano. I hope we get those things for Midnight. We'll see how it all works out, right? Best laid plans again, but it's sounding like lessons have been learned from the history of Cardano, which is a good thing. So Midnight wants to do all of the privacy-centric transactions for all of the networks. So this is kind of an interesting proposition, because if you think about it, it almost sounds too ambitious. But then you think, these are users. These are users. Maybe, they're, largely sort of citizens of Ethereum, or largely they're Bitcoiners, and they spend the biggest proportion of their time inside those ecosystems, maybe. But at the end of the day, they're going to use whatever is best, right? There are some like very tribalistic people who maybe would refuse to use anything that's not, an Ethereum proper project. But I think those kinds of like tribalistic notions are probably going to go out the window. Like we were saying before, people will go wherever the money is, and people will use whatever products and platforms are best. So if Midnight is the best privacy transaction platform, people are probably going to use it regardless of whether they start out in Ethereum or Solana or Bitcoin or somewhere else. So like we mentioned earlier, Midnight is also going to announce a lot of partners. And I think that's going to be happening during day 2 of this Midnight Summit, which is going to be starting pretty soon. They're going to mention a lot of new partners. I'm hoping it's going to be a lot of big names we haven't heard before. It sounds like it's definitely going to be some names we haven't heard before, but I'm excited to hear who these partners are. Charles claims that partners like Google Cloud are actually going to make a lot of money using their billions of dollars of machines to run the proofs if Midnight actually works. So, Cardano is not, there's not an absence of partnership announcements in the history of Cardano. Famously during the Wyoming Summit in 2021, it was like the Dish Network guys were up there, and that partnership maybe didn't pan out the way we all hoped it would. But I'm hoping, since there is sort of a pecuniary motive for some of these big names, I'm hoping that's real and they'll actually stick around and the partnerships will go in the direction we're all hoping they are, because those entities are actually making money. I'm hoping that's the way it turns out, because the partnerships where it's sort of like, let's take an existing organization and just do sort of blockchain things for them, and that's why we're going to onboard them. In the past, maybe that hasn't worked out as well for crypto as we hoped it would. But if the partnership is like, hey, you're going to validate blocks and make money, I think everybody understands that use case. Everybody understands that application of blockchains. So if that's the basis for some of these partnerships, maybe that bodes well for us. Uncle Thanos, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Blue Mammal says 16 million estimated hashes per solution today. Ooh, that's painful. That's painful, dude. That is so painful. Fly Over Me says December will be the start. I hope so. I hope so. Cardano Universe says Midnight is a great name for a privacy token. I agree. I mean, IOG is good at naming things. They've had some cool names for products like Midnight, and then these era names, much cooler. These are much cooler. Okay, this is a reference to what we talked about last night. 74-day countdown to something massive. Can we get a countdown clock? We should. Somebody should make a countdown clock website of some type, and preferably with like automatic messages to the account that proposed that last night. But I'm hoping we'll get some updates on that. I'm hoping word will kind of leak of what that was based on. Usually there's so much interest around those kind of things that there's like leakage, and eventually you find out like what was the basis of that rumor. I hope this is a true rumor, but we're gonna find out. So this sounds pretty promising. Charles is fired up. It sounds like, even though this wasn't a public event, this was pretty much just people building on Midnight. I think they called this Cypher Day or something like that. It sounds like there was, it looked like from all the pictures and the videos, it looked like there was a very decent crowd, very significant crowd there. So it sounds like there's a lot of interest. It sounds like a lot of people are excited. I'm sure what's happened in the markets to Zcash recently, is a big part of what's fired everybody up, because Zcash has done something in the markets that pretty much no other blockchain, no other significant blockchain has been able to do in this kind of environment. So if Zcash, which is a Dino coin, just like us, just like Cardano, if they were able to do that, just because they're privacy focused, it's like, what is a brand new state-of-the-art privacy focused blockchain going to do? So Cardano Universe has a question here. I was wondering if dust could be a burning mechanism for Night or ADA. So, I mean, no, dust is like it's a gas coin. It's I prefer to describe it as an energy coin. It is the energy coin of Midnight. Um, the burning mechanism thing, the problem with burning mechanisms is that the question is always, whose night are you going to burn? We already know there's no ADA. There's no one's ADA to burn. No one is willing to sacrifice their money, right? It's like, you can burn your own. You can burn your own. There's burn addresses even in Cardano. You can send your own ADA to a burn address and do your own burn, but nobody really wants to do that. It's against their own economic interests in most cases. So, yeah, I think, this is accurate. Dust exists to preserve the base token, not burn it. Yeah, it's by using a secondary token as the energy token for the blockchain, you don't have to sacrifice your own token. Otis Freechov says Charles's whiteboard video on Midnight is well worth the view. It made me stoked to see what comes next. I agree with that. I'm also stoked for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the big drama from last night too, because there's been, like a little bit of follow-up, although I think nothing's really resolved. Although sort of the clues, and analysis has sort of led in a slightly different direction than maybe some of the initial stuff that came out. So even last night, this had come out. I referenced this when we talked last night, but I couldn't remember who made this post. So this is a post that says, I looked into the address that sold the 14 million ADA, and it was funded by the Genesis block, the first Cardano transaction ever on 9/23/2017. Full details below. So of course, people saw this, and definitely part of it, part of what came out about this led people to believe that maybe this was, like an emergo. And it was this part that made people think maybe it was emergo or maybe it was the CF. Additional notes, starting from July 15th, 2023, they started delegating to community pools and rotating monthly. So, the fact that the ADA came originally out of the Genesis block, and 2 weeks later, it was sent to this Byron era address. And then it stayed there for over, looks like 3 years until it went to a Shelley address. And then 3 years after that, it started, rotating delegation monthly. People thought maybe this was a Mergo or, like a CF, some CF coins or something like that. So some more additional information we got was this sort of proposal of what kind of a screen the person who made that mistaken, apparently mistaken trade would have seen, all of the different warnings, all the different ways in which they were warned that this was not a good idea, that this was a disastrous trade. And, this is, what you would want. This is like the level of warning you would probably want. There's a lot of questions tied up in this. A lot of people said, hey, the platform shouldn't allow you to make this trade. It should just refuse to make the trade for you because there's no reason to be making a trade where you're burning that much money. Other people said, no, it should be like big boy land and permissionless. And if you want to do something, that's incredibly disastrous, you should be allowed to. So there's different opinions on this, but this is kind of what you expect. Anytime I've used a pool and there was significant slippage, at least in modern times, maybe not in the very, very early days of automated market makers and even automated market makers on Cardano in the early days of that, maybe you didn't have as much warning, but this is kind of what you would expect, when there's going to be that much slippage. So that was some additional information. But this was what I thought was very interesting. Charles came back. So people started proposing, do you think it's possible that the person in question did this all on purpose to bring more awareness to the illiquid DeFi markets on Cardano? That would be quite the sacrifice if they sacrificed that much money to make this point. Charles says it looks like it was an inexperienced voucher holder who activated his account and immediately tried to dump. Hard to say. So if you remember, what happened during the Cardano ICO was that it all happened in Asia for regulatory reasons. And, an overwhelming percentage, the vast majority of the buyers were in Japan. So, and they got vouchers. And eventually they got the coins that corresponded to their vouchers. But, Charles was actually there. So he would be in a good position to guess who this was. And he didn't immediately go to the CF or Emergo. He thinks this was actually somebody who bought in the ICO, basically just held on to their coins all this time, maybe had never used a DEX before and then just decided to, to swap to stables and made this terrible mistake. You notice this pattern, the aberration that it doesn't seem consistent with this is the fact that they were rotating their delegations. But, in Cardano, it's pretty easy and user-friendly to change your delegation. So you can imagine maybe somebody thought, hey, the right thing to do is to rotate my delegation every month. I'll move my delegation around every single month. Maybe this could be a voucher holder who, was rotating their delegation for whatever reason and then decided to swap and made this horrible mistake. So, will we ever know? Maybe, maybe not. But immediately, because Charles was sort of made this original post in jest about there not being any warnings in response to that graphic we just saw with all the warnings about the slippage on it. And that also kind of makes sense. If you imagine this was a Japanese voucher holder, maybe they didn't speak any English. Maybe they weren't that tech savvy. Very possible if this was a Japanese voucher holder, very possible that they didn't speak English and didn't understand sort of the verbal text warnings here. Maybe they weren't, familiar enough with DEXs to understand what the numbers were indicating. So this is all possible. But Charles made this post, pointing, basically emphasizing that obviously there were these huge warnings, and he got some responses, people saying, basically implying like, why didn't you bring stable coins to Cardano? And he responded with this. So the point was made, hey, Charles, why is it that you only react after everything's already messed up? Where's the stable coin we've been asking for? And what's going on with the stuff you promised at the start of the year? He said, it is not my job to bring a stable coin to Cardano, and then repeated that sentence as many times as he possibly could in one post. So, whether you agree or you disagree that it was ever Charles's job to bring a stable coin to Cardano, he's making it very clear here. He does not agree that it was his job to bring a stable coin to Cardano. So Daniel says, anybody who wants to burn their ADA can send it to the chai handle. And Daniil will take super good care of your ADA for you. He says, I'll keep it super warm for you. BindoCam says the price around that time was 0.0024, so around $30,000 worth. They still made out pretty well. Yeah, that's a good point. That person, that may end up being, even with the crazy slippage and catastrophic trade, that may still end up being the greatest investment that person will ever make in their life. That's the ironic thing about crypto and Cardano, is we're all sad when we see these super red days. But if you bought early enough, you're still, basically a lot of people are still in the greatest. Some of those purchases, some of those DCAs in 2018 are still going to be the greatest investments you'll ever make in your life, possibly. Blue Mammal says, if your mind isn't blown after the whiteboard, you weren't paying attention. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So Charles made this post. It is not my job to bring a stable coin to Cardano. And that was followed with this post from BlockJock. So BlockJock says, that's right, it's my job and we did it. If you don't know, BlockJock is associated with USDM. His profile says he's the biz dev lead for USDM, a Moneta managed fiat backed stablecoin. He says, that's right, it is my job and we did it. We have also almost doubled initial liquidity since in 8 months, from 8.7 to just under 15 million. 1.2 sits in NBox exchange. We actually talked about that exchange, NBX exchange. What is it? Norwegian Block Exchange. We talked about that just the other day on this channel. It took, here's an interesting point though. It took USDT, so Tether, it took Tether 3 years to get to 10 million. So this is a really good point. So it sounds like USDM has taken 8 months to get to just under 15 million, and it took Tether 3 years to get to 10 million. This is a really good point. You know, I mean, like, the purpose of decentralization in a decentralized blockchain ecosystem like ours is that it's permissionless and anybody can do it. Anybody can create a stable coin just like Moneta did. Anybody can create a stable coin and do the thing. It's decentralized and permissionless, so anybody can do the thing. And BlockJock is pointing out, you know, hey, we did it. It's decentralized. He even dropped this hashtag hard work pays off. There you go. So, I mean, the strength of a decentralized permissionless ecosystem is that there are an infinite number of people who can do the thing. We get really focused on IO, Emergo, and the Cardano Foundation, you know, and we sort of look to them to accomplish the things we want to be accomplished. But if there's enough demand for it and somebody just picks up the mantle, you know, they can also do the thing. The thing can be done by anybody. And BlockJock is giving us a good example. And I'm glad he mentioned these stats about Moneta, because I didn't realize that what they did in 8 months took Tether years. I mean, I was around when Tether first emerged, and I remember, you know, sort of the evolution of that. But this is a really interesting stat. So, I mean, we're not doing too bad, guys. We're not doing too bad in terms of the growth of projects like this. And this is the beauty of a decentralized ecosystem. Anybody can pick up the mantle and kind of run with something like this. So, speaking of drama, I don't think this is an example of drama. I think this is just like a great stat about a project in our ecosystem. But, you know, speaking about the drama that would cause Charles to have to write this many times, we also got something in the other direction. So here's a post. Let's see if it'll come up. Here's a post. I mentioned we would talk about derangement syndrome. So this post says the CF derangement syndrome is flaring up again. I strongly advise practicing critical thinking rather than simply parroting the talking points of certain individuals. You're better than just being a useful idiot for someone's political games. So, you know, it's like we've got people in our ecosystem who are involved with the Cardano Foundation. It's not just this like nameless, faceless entity. There's like actual human beings who post on Cardano X with us, who are a part of IO and a part of the CF and a part of Emergo. So, you know, at this point, they're going to have some things to say about it too from the CF perspective. So this post says, fair criticism is always welcome and encouraged. CF has a culture of listening and engaging in discussions rather than rewriting history. And then they get into whose job it was to bring stable coins to Cardano, because I think a lot of people are looking at the CF right now. So this post says, regarding the CF's mandate, I took a quick look at the Wayback Machine for Cardano.org and found this very interesting description from 2018. There's a screenshot down here. I actually remember, I remember when this was on the website. I think I remember reading this back in the day. So it says, there are 3 organizations that are contributing to the development of Cardano. The first is the Cardano Foundation, an independent standards body based in Switzerland with core responsibilities to support the community of Cardano users and to work with authorities on regulatory and commercial matters. The second entity working on Cardano is IOHK, a leading cryptocurrency research and development company, which holds the contract to develop the platform until 2020. I also remember that roughly being the case. I can't remember the exact year that the contract was supposed to run out. Obviously, IO has just kind of kept working for us all this time, which is great. The final business partner is Emergo, which invests in startups and assists commercial ventures to build on the Cardano blockchain. So this poster says, based on this, Emergo was the entity originally responsible for getting businesses like stablecoin projects to build on Cardano. Obviously, when I read this paragraph, I don't see, it does say which invests in startups and assists commercial ventures to build on the Cardano blockchain. You can argue, about who agreed to this text, who put this text on the website, who controlled this website, all those kind of things. But I think, it's kind of the perspective being expressed in this post is that, the CF, this perspective is that, and I'm not saying this is the CF's perspective, but I'm saying this poster's perspective is obviously that the CF never agreed to be in charge of stablecoin projects, or at least not according to this. They're kind of implying that according to this, it was never the CF's job to be in charge of bringing stablecoins to Cardano. And of course, a lot of drama kicked off, over the course of the day, kind of related to this idea. And it was sort of like, okay, what is the CF accountable for? What is the job of the CF? And the CF is going to have its perspective on that. Charles is going to have his perspective. Emergo is going to have their own perspective on what they're responsible for. But at the end of the day, I think what we can say, without really getting into who's right, who's being more accurate, the tiny historical details around, who agreed to do what, who was assigned what responsibilities, all those kind of things. I think what we can say is that I haven't seen anybody yet jump up and say, out of the three founding entities, oh yeah, it's us. We're the ones who are going to bring stablecoins to Cardano. You can look back at different posts, where various people might have said, hey, in 2025, and in fact, people were posting a post from Charles where he mentioned stablecoins being a priority for 2025. But at this point, it looks like in November of 2025, nobody is stepping forward of the three entities and saying, oh yeah, it was our job to get stablecoins. We're going to get right on that. So I think as a decentralized ecosystem at this point, we can't really count on any of the founding entities doing this for us. I think it's more like BlockJock posted. We are at the mercy of supply and demand. We're a decentralized ecosystem. And I think if there's demand for something, then somebody can come along and build that thing. They can be the supply that meets that demand. I think that's where it's at. I think that's going to be a lot of things going forward in Cardano. I think if we want certain things, if there's demand for something, then there's going to be a little supply vacuum and somebody can step into that vacuum. They can step into that void and create the supply to meet that demand. I think that's where we're at. I think the days of, looking to these, like paternalistic, founding entities and, demanding they do this, they do that. Where's this? Where's that? I think those days are kind of over, I think IO kind of signed up to be sort of a contract vendor to our ecosystem for a certain amount of time. And, that time was up like half a decade ago and they just kind of kept working. But I think we've gotten past that point where we can, look to these founding entities and demand that they do certain things. I think as a decentralized ecosystem, the things that are actually going to happen are the things that there is demand for. This is like capitalism. We're in the land of capitalism here. And in fact, it's sort of like hyper capitalism because we're all dealing with each other on chain now, right? Governance is happening on chain. It's permissionless. You can launch whatever on chain you want. This is like this hyper on chain form of capitalism. And I think if there's demand for something, somebody's probably going to come along and build it. And if somebody hasn't, then, as all of us as individual parties engaged in this ecosystem, any one of us can fill that void and build that thing. And if everybody's refusing to build it, then maybe there's not enough demand for it. Maybe we actually don't have the demand for it. If Circle is demanding some gigantic amount of money, if they're demanding, I don't know, I can't remember what numbers have been thrown around, like 100 million. If 100 million is the price tag for, a tier 1 stablecoin to come to Cardano and we're not willing to pay it, maybe there's not enough demand for that in our ecosystem if we're not willing to pay for it. Maybe what needs to happen is, what Blockjock is describing here. Maybe as a decentralized ecosystem, people are just going to step into that void and they're going to build the thing up from the ground up, just like Tether did all those years ago. Maybe that's how this is going to work. I don't think we can count anymore on these sort of like grand unveilings, like X founding entity is now unveiling this thing we wanted. I think those days are kind of over. I think it's, the rails are there, and if there's demand for something to be built on those rails, it's going to be built. I think that's where we're at. Taz says, hey gang, I'm late, but I'm here for it. Thank you for being here. Mickey Bubbles says, hello from the UK, 4:40 a.m. here. Whoa, very early. Thank you for joining so early. I appreciate it. Thank you for the content, AOS. Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. Next 12 months are going to be massive. Keep the faith, everyone. I love it. Very optimistic. This is how I feel. The next 12 months are going to be very, very interesting. I'm excited for it. Whatever happened in Bitcoin DeFi? I love Charles, but he seems to go from one thing to the next too much. So, I think, so if we put ourselves in Charles' shoes, and he has the choice of, obviously he's talked in recent videos, he's discussed in recent videos how there's an IO team working on Bitcoin DeFi, and John O'Connor is still, a part of the RealFi team working on RealFi. And RealFi, it sounds like, is going to be a big part of Bitcoin DeFi. But if you're Charles and you have your choice of, building that inside Cardano proper, where you've got to deal with a foundation you don't get along with, or building it in Midnight, where you've got a foundation you very much get along with, it's like, where can we predict he's going to build, most of Bitcoin DeFi? I think it's, we might end up seeing a lot of the Bitcoin DeFi that comes out of IO. We might end up seeing that on Midnight. I don't know. Somebody can ask Charles, Charles, what percentage of Bitcoin DeFi do you predict is going to be built on Midnight versus Cardano mainnet by IO? What percentage of Bitcoin DeFi built by Cardano IO is going to be on Cardano mainnet versus Midnight? So I think we can kind of predict, there's going to be the place where he's going to be happier to build may end up being Midnight because he's got a friendly foundation over there. Cardano versus Midnight will create a whole new network. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole new network, but they just handed a huge chunk of the ownership of that network to us, the ADA holders. So it's kind of like we got directly transplanted into Midnight, just like Kava traveled across the Pacific and shoots were transplanted onto brand new islands. We're sort of like that Kava. We're getting transplanted directly into Midnight, and we can continue to grow on the island of Cardano. Looking forward to a whole host of new partnerships being announced once Midnight is live. Great for Cardano. And it sounds like, Mickey, we're going to get some partnership announcements for Midnight tomorrow at day 2 of the Midnight Summit. And, even more so than before today, after seeing Charles's keynote on the first day of the Midnight Summit, I kind of just think of Midnight as the Cardano privacy layer, because it's like, who owns Midnight? Well, the ADA holders own a huge chunk of it. So we all kind of own, big chunk of the Midnight network. I just kind of think of it as the Cardano privacy layer now. Okay. Mike M says, I will be watching December 8th with intensity. Mike M says, how many exchanges? I think Charles mentioned Binance. I've heard a lot of talk about Kraken. I haven't seen anything definitive on Binance, but I haven't really been looking out for it. So Binance has always been super friendly to Cardano, at least in the past. I mean, Binance was one of the first places you could trade Cardano, and Kraken was also very early. They've both been very friendly to Cardano in the past. Coinbase, not so much. Latecomers. I don't think of them as being super. I like Coinbase, but I don't think of them as being real friendly to us. Let's see, S. Walker. S. Walker has got some fire for the CF there. I won't repeat that. But yeah, S. Walker has something to say about the CF there. Bindocam says Moneta guys were on it. James has a good presence. Yeah, I mean, man, it's I mean, it's like, what's the purpose of being decentralized if you don't have monetas popping up? What's the whole point of decentralization, in terms of building out the ecosystem? If you don't have something like a moneta popping up in the stable coin space. I mean, this is like the benefit of decentralization that's totally permissionless, and a moneta can pop up and do in 8 months, what Tether did in 3 years. Part of that is that the the crypto ecosystem is so much bigger. There's so much more money in it now than in the early years of USDT. But still, this is exactly why you want to have a decentralized ecosystem. Aaron Mayfield says, is there no alt season? I'm scared. You know what, Aaron? I wish I had a good answer to this question, but unfortunately, nobody really knows. I strongly believe that nobody really knows what the market's going to do. And the way that's probably true is you ask yourself, who was predicting we'd be here in November? There were a few people when we hit those highs like a year ago, when we went up to, I'm saying like highs in air quotes, because they weren't as high as we wanted them to be, or we would have all probably sold. When we hit like, what was it, $1.24, $1.30, depending on what exchange you're looking at and, what part of the day you were looking. When we hit those highs like a year ago, there were a couple people saying, this is it. I'm out. I don't like where things are going. You've always got those people. You've always got a few doomers. At all times, you've got these doomers. There'll always be a couple of those people who were like correct. But if you look at the mainstream people making predictions about, the crypto space in general, you can look at all analysts making guesses about the way crypto was going to go in year 4 of the 4-year cycle. Very few of them were predicting that we'd be here in November of 2025. Based on that and the fact that that's been the case every time something weird has happened, nobody really knows. The markets are, it's like a wild beast in a cage. You don't know. Is it going to go to that corner of the cage? Is it going to go to that corner? Is it going to attack the zookeeper? Like, you don't know. So unfortunately, nobody knows. I think nobody knows. Is there going to be an alt season? If so, when is it going to be? The markets are unpredictable. Nobody really knows. So I never make any predictions about that because I don't believe that anybody knows. Marco 5 House. So I would be DCAing, but I left the fiat mines. And started doing this just a couple months ago. So I'm not currently DCAing. I was DCAing like crazy for those 2 years I was in the fiat mines. And that was the whole reason I was in the fiat mines, so I could DCA. If I would have known that we would have these kinds of prices in November 2025, would I have stayed in the fiat mines just so I could DCA at these prices? Possibly. This is very, very attractive. Very, very attractive if you've been DCAing for the last 2 years like I have. So, do you think hardware wallets and seed phrase management are actually realistic security solutions for mainstream adoption, or is this a major barrier to entry? Yeah. So, if you watched the Cardano Summit, if you watched the Cardano Privacy Layer Summit, I mean the Midnight Summit. If you watch the Midnight Summit today, the inventor of JavaScript and Firefox today discussed this exact thing, right? I mean, this dude is basically responsible for the modern internet we have around us now. It's like, if not for JavaScript, what would the internet look like these days? It'd be a very, very different thing if we never had JavaScript. So the guy who's responsible for a lot of what the internet looks like these days, he kind of I believe it was him who talked about on that panel, talked about some of the same things that we sort of, in order to achieve good security in crypto, you have to have quite a bit of technical knowledge. And even if you just say like knowing that you should get a hardware wallet and knowing how to use the hardware wallet and knowing that you shouldn't share the seed phrase with anybody, and not responding when you get those messages from somebody saying they're from the help department at Ledger and they need your seed phrase. Just knowing all those things, it's quite a learning curve. It's like way too complicated for grandma or grandpa. It's like, I think he has a good point about that. We need things to get much, much easier. That was part of my point last night when I talked about this DeFi catastrophe, this AMM DEX catastrophe. This poor person suffered, if that's what it was, if it really was a voucher holder from the ICO. I feel terrible for that person. But part of the problem is that we've got these two things in tension in crypto, right? It's like the foundations of the cryptocurrency space are in, sort of the cypherpunk ideals. And, that involves a lot of notions tied up in cryptography, right? It's like we're basically doing cryptography. We've taken cryptography in this wild direction, so it's way too complicated for the average person. Like, would I turn my mother loose in an AMM DEX with any amount of money she would ever care about? Absolutely not. Would I hand my mother a ledger and just tell her to, go ahead and move her funds into that ledger without, very carefully helping her through every step? Not at all. Right. So it's like, can we really expect the masses, the mainstream to, can we expect that herd to come galloping over cresting over the hill, against the backdrop of the rising sun or whatever, and galloping into the valley of crypto? Not really, because stuff is way too complicated, right? It's like most people have trouble keeping track of their email password. If they have to remember what their email password is instead of it just automatically, being filled in or them automatically logging in, that's a problem for regular corporate workers. And now we're talking about them understanding, how hardware wallets work. These these small hardware devices that are basically just, managing these private keys. It's like they don't even know what we're talking about. They don't even understand the nomenclature. They don't even understand the goal. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand what wallets are, what addresses are. It's like, it's way too complicated. Mike M says, I'm scared. Yep. It's scary. It's scary. Okay, Mission Zambia says, if the founding entities refuse themselves of responsibility, the funding entities should give the Genesis data back to the Treasury. Founding entities, yeah, I mean, people were kind of saying that today, and I mean, this is, it sort of echoes of what Charles said. Charles keeps saying, "Hey, the CF got 600 million," and that's a lot less than Emergo and IO got. They got way more than the CF, just to the credit of the CF. But Charles is, keeps saying, hey, if the CF doesn't want to do it, tell them to give me the 600 million ADA and I'll go do it. He's like, I already have, he had a post, I think today, he said, I already have the prices to make the tier 1 stablecoin thing happen. We already know what the prices are. If the CF wants to hand over that 600 million ADA, I'll go get it done right now. So I don't know how true that is. We've discussed on this channel the problem. The problem for the CF is the way the foundation law works in Switzerland. Apparently, they have personal responsibility. They have personal liability for any big decisions they make. So I kind of get it. If that's true, and they're saying, hey, we don't want to execute these actions because we might have personal liability for this gigantic thing, that apparently might cost like 100 million. We don't want to have that level of personal liability. I kind of don't blame them. I wouldn't want to have personal liability for $100 million decision, right? As an executive at a company, it's a totally different story. You're comfortable with that, and to some degree because of the corporate veil, right? It's like the reason we have corporations are to insulate individuals. Part of the reason is to insulate individuals from that kind of liability because you don't want to make decisions that big with other people's money if you have personal liability. So I kind of get it. It's a problem, but also the people are like, okay, if you guys can't do this, if IO's not going to do it, if Emergo's not going to do it, if the CF's not going to do it, then somebody gives somebody the money to go do it who can do it. That's also logical, So, okay, Mission Zambi says Blockjock is a good guy. Met him in person during the 2024 Cardano Summit. They're doing great things at Moneta. Yep. Wish, it's like we, having a homegrown stablecoin is a very worthwhile endeavor. So I hope all that turns out wonderfully. Coinbase is really strange. I agree. Why do you say that though? Why do you say it's really strange? I actually agree with that though. Coinbase straight sucks. Pucky Hawk says, Mike said Coinbase is really strange. Pucky Hawk says Coinbase straight sucks. I had problems with them until I stopped having problems because I stopped using them. Yeah, I mean, the fact they took so long to list Cardano when Cardano was like a top 10 asset, I think that says a lot. I think that says a lot. S. Walker says, my dog said, Daddy only speaks truth. Coinbase hurt Cardano, and I think it was intentional. Yeah, I mean, they took so long to list Cardano. It's it's hard to disagree with you, Mike. It's hard to disagree with you that they weren't, it's like, man, it's like you could imagine them being a little slow, they've got listing standards, all those kinds of excuses, but it took them so long to list Cardano. It's like, what were you doing? What was going on there? Binochem says, I had a Coinbase account that does nothing at all. It was one of the accounts that got leaked. Now I'm getting idiot scammers calling all the time. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's terrible. 80 clip says, why does the CF even bother to fake it? I think it's that again, I keep saying that I haven't looked at the Swiss Foundation laws to verify what we've been told about those laws. But if the narrative we've been told is correct, then I think it's that. It's like difficult for them to take those kinds of actions if they have personal liability. So I kind of get that. It's just like it's the wrong it's the wrong legal framework for an entity to be doing those kind of things that we want it to do. It sounds like, if that narrative's true. Okay, at Cardano says, my local share purchase platform in New Zealand has stopped ADA purchases. Only sell is possible. No other crypto is affected. That seems very odd to me. That seems very odd to me. I would be very curious to hear if you get any kind of indication of why that's going on. That seems very odd. How long has that been going on? I'm very curious about that. Mike M says, don't hate the man, hate the bureaucracy. Yeah, that's true in a lot of cases. A lot of times when you think a bureaucratic entity is intentionally messing with you, a lot of times it's just bureaucratic failure. That's very true. Thomas Kirkpatrick, thank you for joining. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Is it time for a Luna tattoo? Is it time for a Luna tattoo? I don't think it's that time yet. This would be like the wolf howling at the moon. It's kind of funny because the infamous Mike Novogratz Luna tattoo is also kind of appropriate for midnight, which is hilarious. But I don't think any of us will be copying his exact tattoo. I think if not for the Novogratz tattoo, I think there would be people getting tattoos like that. Just because it's an obvious choice, right? A wolf howling at the moon would be an obvious one to signify midnight. But just because of Novogratz, I think not many people will get that tattoo with respect to midnight. Well, Toro stopped DA2, but came back and said we're open for ADA. You're talking about eToro, right? eToro. Is that what they're called? eToro? Charles was taking it all on in January this year. Yeah, that's the post I was referencing. He made a post where he listed the things they were going to try to get after in 2025. That was a post from January. He did mention stable coins, but apparently that's not his viewpoint now. He's obviously not going after it now, since he wrote it is not my job to bring a stable coin to Cardano like 60 times in this post. So okay. Your comments on, I didn't change it at all. I think yeah, they are giving me like the big font. That is, I do know that is a setting I can change, and I actually didn't change it today. Somehow it just automatically changed. I noticed a couple glitches in the streaming platform over the last week, so I think it's something similar. They're updating something or something, and it's like automatically changed that setting for me. But you know, this is what we get today. This is what we get. um, Cardano Universe says, I see Kraken as being more open and full of acceptance. I'm switching to Kraken. Yeah, I mean, if Kraken is given how long it took Coinbase to list Cardano, I'm not, expecting that Knight will be on Coinbase. So yeah, I mean Kraken and whoever else lists Knight will definitely be scoring points in my book. So what Coinbase was doing was securing their gains on ETH and eliminating competition. Yeah, I mean that's the so I mean I've talked about this many times on the channel, but you've got a whole group of crypto that was very much on the Ethereum train. And, I mean, Charles was once, what was his official title? Like the CEO of Ethereum or something like that, or he had some wild title when he was a co-founder of Ethereum, and then he left and he started Cardano, and Cardano was billed an Ethereum killer. So if you're deeply in bed with the Ethereum ecosystem, it's not in your interest to promote or be open to an Ethereum killer, of course. And there were a lot of Ethereum killers. A lot of them came around kind of during, that sort of 2017 ICO period. There were a lot of, things billed as Ethereum killers, but, Cardano, given that Charles was a part of the founding team of Ethereum, it was probably a much bigger threat than a lot of them, and Coinbase was a part of Center. Center was, Circle and Coinbase coming together to launch USDC. And, USDC is a huge part of the Ethereum ecosystem, home base for USDC. So, I mean, did Coinbase have any reason to help Cardano? Doesn't seem like it. So I think you make a good point, S. Walker. Okay, Sub-Zero says, what good would USDC, USDT do for the Cardano ecosystem if the deal between Stables and ADA, whichever entity, is one-sided? Why is this priority number one? I agree with this perspective because somebody pointed out in the comments on the video in the last couple videos on this channel that tier one stablecoins have come to other ecosystems and not had the impact that the communities of those ecosystems hoped. They just didn't see the huge boost that they thought. And I'm guessing that those ecosystems paid the giant price tag just to get a tier one stablecoin, and they haven't had the giant boost they expected from it. So I'm like very much in favor of the Monetas of the world. And I'm afraid that if we ever do get a tier one stablecoin, if somebody does pay the price for that, people might be disappointed with the lack of it being a cure-all for everything they see, every ill they see. Okay, Skolder makes a good point. Tons of other cryptos have foundations in Switzerland. Yeah, Zug. I mean, Zug is like, kind of like global epicenter of crypto foundations. So tons of other cryptos foundations in Switzerland and don't seem to have these issues. Oh, that's a fair point. I can't disagree with that. Coinbase and Gemini have many Ethereum ties. Yeah, Gemini, the Winklevi twins. The Winklevi don't exactly seem like Cardano lovers either. So Brian Armstrong and those guys are not the only ones. I think the Winklevi don't seem like they love us either. They don't seem like huge Cardano lovers. Okay, Cardano was following up. So almost 10 days now, this problem with this New Zealand exchange. It was a glitch, but gone way beyond now. Kraken is their market maker. Oh, that's distressing. Don't love hearing that. Don't love hearing that at all. Japan is really showing some coolness for crypto. Go Japan. Yeah. So I saw a headline today about the Japanese government possibly doing something pretty big, but I haven't read enough into it to talk about it. So yeah, Japan has been pretty good to crypto, I think, in a lot of ways. I remember back in the day they passed like sort of I think they had a de minimis exception or some kind of special tax treatment really early, something that the US still doesn't have. I think that was the case in Japan. But yeah, Japan seems open to crypto in some ways that Western governments maybe aren't. Pucky Hawk likes Kraken and Robinhood, using Kraken more. Okay. Mallow says, I have trading bot on one centralized exchange that runs for 900 plus days. We need stuff like that on Cardano dexes. Until we don't have simple stuff like that on Cardano, there will not be much use of dexes. Yeah, I agree. We're kind of, we're just like, we're a little bit, we started later. We started way later. We didn't even have smart contracts until Goguen. Goguen kind of happened in like September 2021, and then we didn't really have a Plutus application backend in September 2021. If you're around during those days, everybody who's around probably remembers. We were all excited. Goguen was going to launch. We're like, great, we'll have dApps. We'll have all these dApps. And then Goguen launched. So smart contracts were possible, but there was no interface. There was no software built out to interface between the dApps and the blockchain. So that took a while, and then finally people were building, actually building dApps. We got our first DEX, which was an order book DEX, and then we got an AMM. So we got MuesliSwap, and then we got Sunday Swap, and then we got all the rest. So we're a little further behind. We didn't get smart contracts until much later. So we're behind. Let's see. Crypto Invasion says I only use Kraken now. Cardano Universe says, remember when Coinbase stopped and locked people out from buying and trading? Which time? What approximately what dates you're referring to? Ooh, this is a big question, Jose. Do you think it's possible for midnight to one day be worth more than Cardano? Interesting question we should all be asking right now. Very interesting question. Coinbase may have been late to list Cardano, but as far as I know, Gemini has still not yet listed it. I think that's right. Cardano Universe says Gemini sucks big time. Kraken all the way. Yep, the Winklevi do not love us. It's true. Seems that way at least. 88 Clip says, if Solana is garbage, does that mean success is 80% marketing? I think Solana was kind of the first one to hit that compromise where you just go all in on scaling. It's like decentralization be damned, all in on scaling. And there's big debates about how they count their TPS. Are they counting failed transactions? Are they counting all of the voting kind of stuff as transactions? So the true TPS of Solana is one thing, but if you ask the average person in crypto what their TPS is, they're gonna cite that bigger number. So in a way, that is marketing. They've represented. I would argue they've represented a TPS number that a lot of people have questions about. A controversial TPS number. But when you ask anybody in crypto, what you're going to hear is, Solana is the king of scaling. Solana has done scaling the best. Solana is the fastest. That's the kind of stuff you're going to hear. And, when people are just trying to do meme coin casino stuff, that's all they care about. They just care about being able to do their meme coin casino stuff. They don't care about decentralization. They, care about, the network being able to scale to do these giant meme coin drops. So, I think Solana, they definitely mastered that. If you ask who made the best meme coin casino, it was Solana. And what was the biggest trend this cycle? Being a meme coin casino. So they definitely won the cycle in that respect. Bindo Cam likes Kraken. Yar, the CBs be my favorite market. Yep, Kraken. Love Japan. Yep. Did you see the CoinDesk guy sitting next to Charles? Tension. I didn't see that. I didn't notice because I don't think I know which guy is the CoinDesk guy. I remember all the discussion back in the day. If it's the same guy from back in the day, I remember we used to talk about him quite a bit. Not me personally on this channel, but I mean us in Cardano X used to talk about him quite a bit. But I didn't notice. I wasn't paying enough attention, I guess. I don't know. I would also love to hear. When do you think we can stake night? So, I think that comes down to, we've got the federated. That question comes down to, when these things are going to happen. So we've got, if we go back to this picture, we've got Charles saying we're going to get Hilo on December 8th. We're going to get Kokolu in Q1. And that's going to be, Kokolu is going to be the federated mainnet. And we're not even going to have like ITN apparently until Mohalu, which is Q2 2026. And then at some point, the ITN becomes a mainnet. So, I assume the ITN is, if it operates like the Cardano ITN, which had staking, obviously for the stake pools to run, there had to be staking. So if they do it the same way, then I assume that's how it's going to go. We should hit one more. There's one more interesting news item we can hit right now, though. So we have obviously lost. We have lost a constitutional committee member. So that means we need to elect a new constitutional committee member. So here is the information from Intersect on that, and I can take you right down to the key dates here. So Monday, November 17th, candidate registration will open up. These are UTC noon times. So November 24th, candidate registration will close. Campaign week begins. December 1st, voting on ecclesia. December 5th, voting closes, results audited, and then December 8th, governance actions submitted on chain. So we won't have an official on-chain governance action till December 8th. So I think that's the same day Hilo starts. So the day Hilo starts, we'll get an actual governance action and we'll all decide. But actually, I thought the ecclesia, if I remember right, we used ecclesia previously for, was it budget stuff? For the budget process. And I thought ecclesia worked pretty well, actually. I thought ecclesia was a pretty good experience. So that's going to be the process to name a new constitutional committee member. You'll remember we lost one constitutional committee member because they counted on getting paid and the DReps did not vote to pay them. So here we go. We get to vote for a new one. So that's going down as well. Yeah, the staking. I think the staking is going to happen. I think when we can stake the night, I'm guessing that's going to be when the ITN starts. Why the big price tag for a tier one? Isn't it good for them too? See, that's what you'd think. You'd think that they would be like rapidly trying to expand to other ecosystems. Based on what I've even talked about on this channel about like there are some numbers around Tether that people can talk about. Basically like Tether is far more profitable than any bank you can name and has this absurdly low number of employees. So Tether's profits per employee are like incredible. It's incredible, the profitableness of these stablecoin companies. So I think they're making so much money that it's just like a distraction from making money for them to expand in a new ecosystem now. Normal businesses that aren't like hyper profitable, doing crazy volume and revenue, it's like they're happy to expand to new customer bases because they want more customers. But when you're just like making money hand over fist, it's like expanding new customers is kind of just like distraction, especially because new customers are joining them, using them every day on the chains they're already on. So expanding in a new chain, I think, is just like a distraction from the hand over fist money making. That's my take on it. And I think that's why the price tag is so big. It's because they're already making so much money. So like, pay us this much and we'll do it, but less than that, it's not even worth our time. Thanks for joining at Cardano. Appreciate it. Okay, this is interesting. Coop to Scoop KC says, which time? Gemini. Okay, Cardano Universe says Gemini froze my Axie. Said it was not tradable after I bought on Gemini. Held for 2 years on Gemini while Coinbase traded it. Transferred to Coinbase. Wow. That does not sound good. That doesn't sound good. I'm sorry to hear that. I think Solana just hates bots making ghost trades to act like they're doing. Just hates or just has. So you're saying, James is saying, I think Solana has ghost bots making ghost trades. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions. There's been a lot of controversy about Solana's TPS numbers. And it's like, the cool thing is, we know IOG is not really spending all of their energy on Midnight because they're building out Leos for us, which is input endorsers. And the numbers we've been told around input endorsers are awesome, right? Like, there are people even in our ecosystem who have estimates of what they think the true Solana TPS is. And the numbers we're seeing being discussed around input endorsers, Ouroboros Leos, which IOG is building out for us right now with the money we put aside for them in the budget. Those numbers are awesome compared to the Solana numbers. Those numbers are great. They're much higher than the numbers I see people saying are the true TPS numbers for Solana. So we'll see. Obviously, we've got to see Ouroboros Leos in action. We've got to see input endorsers in action to know what those numbers are really going to look like on the ground. It's like, before I believe anything in crypto, I want to see it in operation. But if everything goes sort of the way we've been told it's going to go, it sounds like even that TPS advantage will no longer exist if Leos goes the way we think. So I think, no matter how you dice it, though, Solana won the meme coin casino thing. And I'm kind of happy to give that to them. I don't know if I'd want to have, it's like Cardano wasn't the biggest NFT chain in crypto. We didn't win. We weren't like the grand champions of NFT casino during the previous cycle. And I was okay with that. And we weren't the grand champions of being a meme coin casino this cycle. I'm also okay with that. I'm okay with us making our mark in other areas, like RealFi, like real world assets, those kind of things. That's what I'm more interested in. So I'm kind of okay. With this. The CoinDesk guy was super nervous, but Charles is very comfortable. He seems very, very comfortable in those kind of atmospheres. It's like we've seen him do interviews with people who seem to hate him and who he's had words with online, at least to the extent you can say that. And he seems very comfortable once he gets those people in front of him. He seems fine. Thank you, D.U. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, you will not see me running for constitutional committee member. I'm perfectly happy doing what I'm doing. I don't want to be a constitutional committee member. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of, I've talked about this recently on the channel, but it's kind of just a ministerial role. They basically have to make this determination. Does this proposal violate the Constitution? It's kind of just legal analysis. It's kind of just a legal determination, really. So that's an important job. Do I want to do it? Not at all. Not at all. I don't want to do that job at all. So, and some other people do, and I thank them for their service. So, yep. The Winklevi seem to be very NYC based for sure. Yeah, BindoCamp says Sol's TPS should be failures per second. Yeah, this is one of the big complaints about the TPS numbers we see sometimes for Solana. They include failed transactions in the TPS. So I definitely agree with those kinds of criticism that you shouldn't be including failed transactions. So I think that's all of the news for the day. I think we've covered all the big news items. 88 Clip says, what are we supposed to build if Charles and his team couldn't or didn't do it? I don't even think it's I think there's a lot of things. So the universe of things you can build on Cardano is kind of coextant with like the universe of things you can build in crypto. So you can kind of build whatever you want on Cardano. And now with Midnight, you can build even more privacy centric things, that would have been difficult to build on Cardano. So we can kind of build whatever we want. I think IOG basically built all of the underlying Cardano infrastructure. So I don't think it's necessarily that IOG couldn't build any particular thing. I think they're just like over the course of the existence of IOG, they're only going to build so much. There's only so many things. There's only so many hours in the day, even for a large organization like that. So, they're large in terms of like the number of Haskell developers they employed or worked with, at certain points. But even they can only build so much, and Charles, he obviously is going to be interested in different things at different times. Right now he's very interested in privacy. So it's his entity. So they're going to build things he's interested in. But I think we can still build anything, and I think people will. I think the decentralization of Cardano is always going to be attractive to people who prize decentralization, which should really be everybody in crypto. I think they're always going to want to build on the most decentralized network. So I think Cardano is always going to be. I do think it is moving toward this like Cardano layerverse kind of concept. I think that's what we are going to end up with. You're going to have this bedrock of fundamental security and decentralization. Maybe acting as a settlement layer plus, a bunch of other things. But I think that's always going to be like the foundational layer. And then you're going to have many, many layers built on top of this, Midnight being the first big layer, but also Hydra-based state channel layers and all these kind of things. There'll be other maybe ZK layers of various types. People are talking about building or building all these things right now. So I think all these kind of things are going to be built in Cardano. So I think a lot of things are going to be built. Maybe we can get ChatGPT to do the job. You mean the job of getting like we just give ChatGPT 100 million and have it go negotiate with Circle to get USDC. Maybe that's the approach we need to take. Maybe we just need to give 100 million in stables to an AI agent and let the AI agent start firing off emails to Circle. Maybe that's the way to go. That would definitely make some news. There'd definitely be some news on that. That would definitely make global news, I think. But I think we have covered all of the news that is out there today, at least a good selection of it, a good cross section of it. So I hope everybody is starting out a great week. Today is if you're in the part of the world where it's already November 18th, I think we're in the final day of sort of the non-browser only mining in the scavenger mine. So the next full day of mining will be, I believe it's the browser only day. So that's kind of a little change. And then the scavenger mine will be over. Then we'll all kind of be done with the scavenger mining. So I think there's good, interesting things going on this week. Hopefully we'll learn more, especially about the partners tomorrow. Basically today, later on today, for those of you in the Eastern Hemisphere. So I think we're going to, hopefully we'll have some more good news items this week. But I hope everybody is starting on a great week. I hope you had a good weekend. Hope you're looking forward to a great rest of the week. And I'll talk to you soon.